I stood there, hand outstretched, reaching for the TV remote. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of lazy day that begged for nothing more than a good movie and a beer. But as I stretched, I caught a sound, a faint creak, like someone walking across the floorboards above. "Megan," Jennifer's voice broke through the silence, her attention still glued to her phone. "Did you hear that weird noise?" Megan didn't respond at first. She just flicked her eyes toward me, as if she were asking for permission to keep watching her show. Jennifer didn't even look up. "Just the house settling," she muttered, a dismissive tone trailing off. Like I was the problem, not the house. I'd greeted them both every morning with the usual cheer, hoping for some kind of connection, but it always fell flat. Silence, empty looks. I thought about this morning, the receipt for blueberry pancakes on the counter, 2 breakfasts, 2 drinks, and not a single mention of me, not a glance. I grabbed the remote again, but Megan was faster, snatching it from the table and holding it to her chest like I was about to steal something. "We're watching something," she said, and I could hear the command in her voice. Like she owned the damn thing. I lowered my hand, the sting of humiliation burning hotter than I cared to admit. I walked into the kitchen, past the sink piled high with dishes. Dishes I hadn't even touched, groceries I didn't eat. I ran my hand across the edge of the counter, tracing the thin layer of dust that had settled there, unnoticed. As I reached for the fridge, the thought hit me, cold and sharp. Am I actually gone already? I paused, the hum of the refrigerator buzzing behind me, and glanced across the kitchen. Jennifer's briefcase was sitting by the back door, out of place, not the usual Sunday night habit. I hesitated, then walked over, curious, but also bracing myself for something I didn't know I was looking for. The top of the case was already open. I could see the papers inside, neatly stacked, a dull sheen of authority to them. Divorce papers. My hand shook as I flipped them open. The words blurred at first, familiar but foreign, all the same. I read slowly, my eyes locking onto the terms. Division of assets. That made sense. But then there was the section on visitation rights, restrictions. Megan. She was 17, not a little kid anymore. Even then, visitation rules applied on paper, but in reality, she would choose for herself. But here it was, written out, clear as day. I could barely breathe as I took in the sticky note. Sign here, just like that. A command. No explanation, no conversation, just a demand for my signature, as if everything that had been building for the past month was nothing but a foregone conclusion. I felt the weight of it press down on me, sharp and suffocating. The realization hit hard. The past month hadn't been about conflict. It hadn't been about arguments or misunderstandings. No, it had been about erasure, about making sure I disappeared without ever knowing when it started or how deep it went. It was a calculated move, one designed to force my hand, to make me the one who would leave. I snapped the papers shut and packed them back into the briefcase exactly as I found them, neat, organized, sterile. I couldn't let it be that easy. I couldn't let it end this way. Upstairs, I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet. I filled it with a few shirts, a pair of jeans, and my laptop. Then, without thinking, I reached for the framed picture of Megan when she was little. The one where she was grinning with her front teeth missing, her little hand clutching my finger. I'd forgotten about that photo for so long, but it felt important, so I slipped it into the bag. I stood there for a moment, just looking at the empty room. A part of me expected them to call out, ask where I was going, but they wouldn't. Not anymore. I grabbed a piece of paper from the desk, scribbled a quick note. Gone to clear my head. Don't wait up. I didn't even know what I meant by that, but it was true enough. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I sure as hell wasn't staying here. I walked downstairs and paused in the living room. Jennifer and Megan were on the couch, their eyes glued to their phones. I took a breath, the air thick in my lungs. I walked past them without saying a word. Neither of them looked up. Neither of them noticed. I stepped out the front door, closing it softly behind me. The cold hit my face like a slap, and I didn't even care. The silence followed me, but it wasn't as loud as it had been in the house. Maybe because I wasn't there to fill it with my own resignation. I pulled into my hometown just before dawn, the kind of early morning quiet that felt like the whole world was holding its breath. The duffel bag on my shoulder felt heavier than it should have, but not from the clothes inside. No, it was the weight of everything. Everything I'd just walked away from. Everything I wasn't sure how to face. At 5:12 a.m., I stood on the porch of my dad's house and rang the bell. It felt strange, standing there, almost like I was knocking on a door I hadn't knocked on in years. Earl, my father, answered in an old robe, his hair sticking out in every direction like he'd just woken up. His face went through a brief moment of confusion, then shock. "Phil?" He blinked, stepping back from the door. "What's going on?" I didn't have much to say, not in the way I thought I would, not in some dramatic speech. I just said it, flat. "They erased me, like I didn't exist." He looked at me, silent, processing it. His face hardened, fists tightening at his sides. I could feel the anger in him, even if he didn't say anything. But he held it in, like he always did. "That's not how you end 22 years, he muttered finally, his voice low. We didn't talk long. He just let me in, wordlessly. It wasn't a question anymore. He knew, and I knew it was better to be here than anywhere else. Mom, June, came downstairs a few minutes later, rubbing her eyes, a hairnet on her head like it was any other day. She didn't ask me why I was there. She didn't need to. She just walked straight into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out eggs and bacon. She never wasted time. Her crisis response was always action. No questions, no tears, just make breakfast. "Sit down, Phil," she said without looking at me. "You'll feel better after you've eaten." I sat down at the table, the smell of frying bacon hitting me, greasy and warm. My stomach twisted, but I didn't want to be rude. She listened to what happened. Everything, in pieces. The short version of it anyway. But when I finished, she didn't offer comfort or sympathy. Instead, she set the skillet down, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and said it plainly. "You disappeared a long time ago, son. You've been giving yourself away piece by piece. You think they did this to you, but you were doing it to yourself all along." The words cut deep, sharper than anything Jennifer had thrown my way. But they were true. I'd let it happen. I'd let myself fade into the background until there was nothing left. I didn't have an answer, just a hard lump sitting in my throat. "You stay here for 3 months, she said, her voice no longer questioning but firm. "No decisions. Not yet. You'll stay here and figure yourself out." I tried to argue, to say I couldn't just sit around and do nothing, that I needed to make something happen now. But she cut me off, her tone leaving no room for debate. "No, you're staying. For 3 months, no exceptions." I opened my mouth to protest again, but something about the finality in her voice made it clear. I wasn't going anywhere, and maybe I didn't want to. Not yet. So I sat there, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, looking out at the kitchen window, knowing that whatever came next would be different. Everything was different now. I wasn't sure if I was broken or just starting to put the pieces back together, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. The next night, Todd showed up with takeout, just like he always did when he wanted to check in. He'd been through his own brutal divorce 3 years ago, and though we hadn't talked much since, I knew he understood the mess I was in. He handed me a greasy bag of Chinese food, like the answer to everything would be in the fortune cookies. We sat on the porch, the cold creeping in from all sides, but it was the kind of cold you didn't notice when you were deep in conversation. Todd picked up a piece of General Tso's chicken, chewing slowly, like he was trying to choose his words carefully. "You know," he said, "when it all fell apart with Katie, I couldn't see it at first. I didn't see what she was doing, how she was just whittling me down, piece by piece. Every day she'd criticize this, pick at that, and eventually, I just disappeared. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I could feel it, his words hitting a little too close. I nodded, trying to avoid the lump in my throat. "The person who makes you feel invisible is showing you how much they value you," Todd continued, his eyes hardening, his voice low. "Believe them. They're showing you exactly how much they think you're worth." His words settled around me, heavy. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding on to, how much I was still trying to pretend things weren't as bad as they were, but they were, and I had to face it. I had let it happen. Jennifer's silences, her avoidance. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't me being crazy. She wanted me gone. Todd leaned forward, grabbing his sketchbook from the table beside him. He flipped it open and began drawing, his pen moving fast as if he was marking a map. "You need to see it clearly," he said, his voice more urgent now. "You need to see who you were before all of this, before her, before you let them turn you into static." He drew a line, splitting the page in two. On the left side, he wrote down my name, my age, and a list of things I used to care about: playing guitar, hiking in the mountains, that fire in my chest whenever I talked about my favorite books. I could barely remember some of those things. He drew another line, further down, and just wrote now. Nothing. Blank. I stared at the page, unable to fill in a single thing. I had no idea what mattered to me anymore. No clue who I was when I wasn't hiding behind her silence, or Megan's indifference, or the expectation of what I was supposed to be. I was nothing more than a faded outline, a shadow of the guy I used to be. Todd closed the sketchbook with a snap, leaning back in his chair. You have to use these 3 months, Phil. Don't make any decisions. Don't make any calls. Just use them to remember who you were before they decided you weren't worth anything. His voice softened a little, but the firmness didn't leave his eyes. You weren't always this guy. You don't have to be. I was silent for a long time. My mind kept spinning, the weight of everything grinding me down. 3 months. A lifetime of choices, of decisions, of lies, and it was all going to come down to 3 months. But part of me knew Todd was right. I didn't have anything to lose by sitting still. I didn't have to fix everything overnight. I didn't have to make everything make sense all at once. I could take the time to figure out who I was without the noise. So I nodded. Okay, 3 months? It wasn't peace. It wasn't closure. But it was something. Quietly, something inside me started to settle. Not into calm, but into readiness. Like a knot slowly loosening, not untangling, but at least easing enough to breathe again. I didn't know what the next step was, but I was finally ready to figure it out. 3 weeks in, and I was still trying to figure out how to move forward. The morning air in Earl's house felt stagnant, like 1,000 decisions I wasn't making were collecting dust. I was at the old computer in the corner of the living room, the one that looked like it belonged in a museum. The thing was so slow, I almost gave up on updating my resume entirely. But it was time, I knew that much. I clicked around, eventually finding an old email login. Something about it felt familiar, like maybe I'd left an old trail behind. I opened it, not expecting much, but what I found hit me in the gut like a punch. It was a thread between Jennifer and Megan's school counselor. At first, it didn't even register. Then I read the words Jennifer had written, each one sinking deeper into me. Phil's having some issues. His depression is affecting our daughter's home environment. I'm trying to hold things together. I read it again, slower this time. I couldn't breathe. My depression. That's how she was framing it. That's how she had been framing it to anyone who'd listen. Like I wasn't a partner. Like I wasn't a father. Like I was just a liability. I slammed the desk with my fist, the anger bubbling up like a boil about to burst. I printed every email, every word, documenting what I was starting to see clearly, the slow poisoning of my character. Each email was a stroke in a calculated portrait. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the problem. But she'd made sure everyone around me believed I was. The printer clunked as it spit out the pages, but I couldn't stop there. I opened the bank account app. I'd been meaning to check it for weeks, but something had kept me from doing it. Now I had no choice. I froze. The balance on the screen went from $39,000 to barely $3,000. My heart slammed in my chest. I scrolled further, the numbers getting blurrier the longer I stared. Quiet, consistent transfers. Hundreds of small withdrawals, all of them heading to an account I didn't recognize. Jennifer's account. I wanted to break something. I wanted to scream. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the screen. Betrayal didn't feel like the word for it. It was worse. It was calculated. I stared at the phone, wondering if I should call her. But then it rang. It was my boss, the one person I hadn't heard from since everything had started to unravel. Phil, I need to talk to you about something, he said, his voice tight with something I couldn't quite place. Jennifer called me a few weeks ago, said you were struggling. She mentioned your mental health, that maybe you needed some time off. She called my work. My pulse shot up, the blood rushing in my ears. The room around me spun, but I stayed still. No fight, no defense, just numbness. I didn't speak for a long time, letting him ramble on, something about how she'd been concerned, how she wanted him to know she was just trying to help. But all I could hear in the background were her whispers, setting me up. When I finally hung up, I felt like I'd been hit by a freight train. My own wife had turned me into a goddamn case study for her to use against me. I was the crazy one, the broken one, the man who couldn't keep it together. That night, Todd came over. He'd been quiet, letting me process everything, but I think he could see the change in me. See how my anger had sharpened into something more dangerous. We sat in the kitchen, the takeout Chinese now forgotten between us. Todd didn't waste time. He knew exactly what needed to be done. "We need to map this out," he said, pushing his food aside. He grabbed a napkin, the back of it torn and crinkled, but it was better than nothing. "For months she's been setting you up for this." The words felt like a slap. For months. He was right, though. It was a pattern I hadn't seen. Todd grabbed his phone, tapping through his notes as he spoke. The financials, the emails, the subtle digs. This wasn't just you two falling apart. This was her plan. She wanted you gone, Phil. And she wanted you to look crazy when you left. He stared at me, dead in the eyes, and I saw something else in his gaze. Determination. "Now, we build your case." He wasn't wrong. Everything I'd seen, every email, every stolen dollar, was evidence. It wasn't just a messy divorce. It was a hit job. "I'm not crazy," I muttered, the words feeling like something I'd never said aloud before. Todd nodded. "No, you're not. And we're going to make sure everyone else sees that too." We spent the next hour going over every detail. The dates, the transfers, the emails. It was all there. It was her blueprint. But now, it was mine too. When Todd left, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel victory. But I felt something stirring. Something I hadn't felt in months. Control, power. And maybe, just maybe, I had a way out of the hole she'd buried me in. The next few weeks felt like a blur, but they were full of action. I opened a new bank account, one Jennifer didn't know about, and started putting aside whatever I could. Every paycheck from my part-time gig at Earl's, every little cash deposit. I wasn't going to get screwed again. No more surprises. I kept every document, every email from Jennifer, every bank statement, every phone call record. I'd made copies of everything. It was like building a wall brick by brick, so thick I couldn't see over it, but I sure as hell could feel it growing taller. Earl helped me with the financial side of things. He sat at his ancient desk, his eyes squinting through bifocals, sorting through transfers, pulling out the patterns I'd missed. "Courts hate patterns," he said under his breath, scribbling on a yellow legal pad. "The more they're consistent, the harder it is for them to ignore. Stick to the facts. That's how we'll beat this." I didn't argue. He was right. Every shady transfer, every attempt to drain my bank account, it all needed to be laid out clean. No emotion, no stories, just cold, hard numbers. Mom didn't waste any time either. She got on the phone with 3 of my old friends, teachers, coaches, people who knew me when I was more than just a husband and father. They had all seen me as a man, a good one. They all agreed to write character statements, detailing what I was like before I let everything slip away. I didn't talk to Jennifer. I didn't reach out to Megan. I didn't want to know what they thought of me. I let them believe I was broken. It was easier that way. If they saw me as a failure, let them. I wasn't trying to convince them otherwise. I had enough to deal with. A month went by, and I kept to myself, quiet, focused. I found my rhythm. Then, one afternoon, I checked my email on Earl's computer. There it was, a job offer, a real one. It was with the Public Records Archive in a neighboring city. Better pay, better position, a chance at something fresh, something that wasn't tainted by anything from my old life. I stared at the offer for a long time. My stomach twisted. It felt like the kind of decision you make when you realize you've been walking around with one foot in the past and the other in the future. The moment I accepted it, I was saying goodbye to everything. But that was the point, wasn't it? I needed to start over. I called the hiring manager back, told her I'd take it. I didn't even hesitate. Then I started packing. Just a duffel bag, some boxes of books and clothes, a few mementos I could never leave behind. I moved into a small one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people didn't know your business. It was exactly what I needed. I didn't need the chaos of my old house, the clutter of what used to be a family. I needed silence. Each morning, I woke up with a fresh sense of possibility. I brewed coffee in a small kitchen, the rich smell filling the air. I opened the windows, letting the cool breeze in. No one ignored me here. No one erased me. There was just me, quiet, alone, but not lonely. I'd sit with my coffee, a book in hand, watching the world wake up. It was the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. The noise in my head started to quiet down, replaced by the small, simple acts of living that had once meant so much to me. I could feel myself coming back, the man I was before Jennifer's silence, before the erasure. It wasn't completely gone. He was still there. I just had to find him again. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what I'd find. 2 months later, the phone rang. It was Megan. I didn't recognize the number at first, but I knew it was her when I picked up. "Dad, I need your tax info for my FAFSA." Her voice was cold, flat, like she was reading off a script she had memorized. In the background, I could hear Jennifer's voice too, faint but clear. She was whispering something, but it didn't matter. Megan wasn't calling because she cared about me. She was just doing what she'd been told. I didn't say anything for a second. I wasn't sure what to say. But then it just came out. "You didn't call for 2 months. You didn't ask if I was okay." There was a pause. Then Megan snapped, her voice sharp. "Why are you doing this?" I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because for once, I'm not doing what I'm told. I'm doing what's right." Silence. Then the sound of the line cutting off. She hung up. No goodbye, no explanation, just the click of the call ending. I stood there for a few seconds, holding the phone, not sure what to do with the emptiness that filled the space between me and her. There was a crack in my chest, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood still. It hurt, but it was the kind of hurt I was starting to understand. It wasn't for me to fix. I wasn't the one who had broken anything. I went for a walk. The air was cool, but not too cold, and it felt good to move, to stretch the tightness out of my shoulders. I didn't think about Megan or Jennifer. I just kept walking, letting the quiet settle around me. When I got back to my apartment, I grabbed a notebook from the kitchen counter. I didn't even know why I wrote, but I did. I scribbled down my thoughts. I can't force her to see. I can only be here when she's ready. That was it. The answer had been there all along. I couldn't make her understand. I couldn't force her to see me as anything other than the version of myself she had been told about. So I would wait. Not in the sense of sitting around and hoping she'd come around, but in the sense that I would keep living, keep showing up. When she was ready to see the real me, I'd be here. Until then, there was nothing more to say, nothing more to do, just breathe and keep going. 5 years had passed since I'd last spoken to Jennifer. When the phone rang, I didn't recognize the number, but when I picked it up, I knew instantly. "Phil," she said, the word cold, the way it always had been. "Megan's getting married. She wants you there." My heart didn't leap. It didn't race. It just stalled. I had no idea what to feel, just that the weight of her words was sinking into me in a way I wasn't ready for. The idea of seeing them again, seeing her again, was like stepping into a room full of smoke. You didn't know how thick it was until you took a breath. "I'll be there," I said, my voice flat. And the call ended as abruptly as it had started. I hung up, staring at the phone. There was no anger anymore, no bitterness, just a deep, slow exhaustion. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this, but I had no choice. Megan wanted me there. Maybe that was enough. I spent the next few hours preparing like I was going to war. A clean suit, a crisp shirt, everything had to be perfect. I didn't know who I was showing up for. Megan, myself, probably both. But there was a quiet confidence as I buttoned up the jacket, as I checked myself in the mirror. I wasn't the same man who left. I was different, stronger, not for her, not for Jennifer, but for me. When I arrived at the church, the place was already packed. I sat in the back, alone. I didn't know anyone there. No friends, no family, just faces in the crowd. I watched the ceremony from my seat, hands folded in my lap. It felt like an out-of-body experience, like I was observing someone else's life. Then Megan entered, walking down the aisle on Jennifer's arm. My chest tightened as I watched her, all grown up, dressed in white. She was still beautiful, but when she saw me, when her eyes caught mine, everything stopped. She froze mid-step, her face going pale, her mouth falling open. She whispered something to Jennifer, and I saw Jennifer turn. Her eyes locked on me, then hardened. Her expression stiffened, almost like I wasn't a person but an object, something she had to acknowledge only because it was unavoidable. And then I saw Spencer, Jennifer's new husband. He glanced over at me too, his face full of confusion. It spread across the room like a ripple. Megan's vows went on, but I wasn't listening to them. I wasn't watching her as she spoke her promises. I was watching Jennifer, watching her try to hold it together, her jaw clenched, eyes darting between the aisle and me. She was still the same, still trying to control everything, still trying to push me out. But I could see it now. She wasn't in control, not anymore. When the ceremony finally ended, I didn't wait around. No applause, no congratulations. I just got up and walked out, quietly. No one stopped me. No one tried to stop me. I made my way to the parking lot, my feet moving like they knew exactly where they were going. The air outside was cooler, the sky bruising into evening. I could feel the weight of the day pressing down, but I didn't want to let it show. Then I heard her, Jennifer, her heels clicking on the pavement as she jogged toward me. "You came," she said, her voice shaky, like she couldn't believe I was still standing there, still walking, still breathing. I turned to face her, my hands in my pockets, calm. I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I just wasn't going to be who she wanted me to be anymore. "You tried to erase me," I said, my voice even. "But I'm still standing, stronger now, and you don't get to say what that means." She flinched, but I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned away and walked to my car, opened the door, and slid inside. The engine hummed to life as I pulled out of the lot. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. As I drove home to the life I'd built, a life she'd never touch again, I felt something in me settle. It wasn't peace, not exactly, but it was mine, and that was enough. I got back to the apartment and tossed the leftovers in the fridge. The place was quiet, like it always was, but tonight it felt different. I sank into the thrift store couch, the fabric worn smooth from years of use, and cracked open a beer. The game was on, but I wasn't really watching. The sound of the commentators blended into the background as I stared at the TV, the cold bottle against my hand, trying to let everything settle in. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Megan. "Why'd you come today?" No warmth. No real curiosity. Just words, flat and empty, like she was waiting for a specific answer. I looked at the screen for a moment. Part of me wanted to say something that would make her understand, but I knew better. I typed, "Because I'm still your dad, even if you forgot I exist." Then I powered off my phone. There was nothing left to say. Nothing she could hear that would make any difference right now. Later that night, I grabbed my journal and wrote down the only thing that really mattered. I wasn't sure why I kept writing. Maybe it was because the words helped me feel like I had control over what was left of the story. She saw me, Jennifer saw me, shaking. Real revenge wasn't in the anger. It wasn't in the yelling or the confrontation. It was in the calm, the control, the peace. It was showing up, not for them, but for me. Composed, untouchable. The kind of man who didn't have to prove anything anymore. I closed the journal and laid back in bed. The window cracked open just enough for the cool night air to slip inside. The sounds of the neighborhood drifted up. The distant hum of traffic, a dog barking, the occasional voice on a late-night walk. No arguing, no silence games, no fear. Just the sound of my own breath, steady and clear. I wasn't invisible anymore. I didn't need to be. I had walked away from everything they'd tried to make me. Small, broken, easy to forget. And I didn't just survive. I built something stronger, something no one could erase. In the end, I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't have to. I just found myself again.